Guys. Hopefully you've seen this video that Order of Man put out recently. If not, I'll put a link in the description here. It's a great video, and Ryan Mickler, he puts out great content on a consistent basis. But he did mention something in this video that I wanted to talk about and have a different view on that I think is important to discuss. So let me just start out by saying that I've been following the Order of Man podcast for a few years now. In fact, I've even mentioned before that one of the biggest reasons that I started a podcast was a direct result of the positive impacts on my daily life that his content was having through a video series that was available on the Warrior Poet Society network. And so I don't say any of these things to nitpick. And of course, no one content creator or voice or influencer is going to have perspectives that you agree with 100% of the time. And if you do find someone that you are never disagreeing with and never challenged by, then you should probably start including other voices and find different circles, because you do need to be challenging yourself. So my point isn't to, point the finger and say that he's wrong. But like I said, I do believe that it's important to discuss this other perspective. And he even says in the video, the point of the content is to encourage discussion. So that's what we're going to do here. So the title of the video is 10 Harsh Truths for Men. And I actually agree with the vast majority of what Ryan's saying there, especially talking about starting off with discipline and responsibility and affecting the things that you can control and having peace with the things that you can't, so that you know where to focus your efforts. But ultimately, responsibility and blame are not the same thing. And I love that he highlights that. A lot of things may happen that aren't your fault, but every situation that you find yourself in, good or bad, is your responsibility to be the steward of. And I love that. And there was a lot of great things in there. I'm not going to go through one by one. That's not what this video is about. But then we get to harsh truth number 5. And he even says, this is something every time he brings it up, there's some sort of controversy and there's debate and discussion. And I have never made a response video like this. I'm not one to have those debates. But like Ryan said, it's a point that he's made multiple times, and I do see the value in the discussion here. And this is basically, in this instance, the harsh truth number 5 is speaking out against vulnerability, and that, nobody cares about your problems. Nobody wants to hear you complain. And to a degree, that absolutely is true. And then he says that nobody, and specifically no woman, values a vulnerable man, and that vulnerability is synonymous with weakness. And the video does discuss, the issue of semantics, and we're just playing with words here. But there is a truth that I want to dig into here. And as I was listening to this video, I was just playing in the background while I'm working, I started to have this disagreement in my head, and I'm thinking of other things that, there are other aspects that are super important. And then as the video continues, he mentions the things that I'm thinking about, is humility and honesty. Like, oh, perfect. Okay. And then I'm thinking, well, there's one more thing here. And then the video continues and it's completed by one more thing. And I'm thinking, oh, awesome. I'm not even going to have to, disagree or even say anything about this. But the third thing that he mentions is action. And throughout this process, he does discuss the idea of humility and honesty, and being able to say to someone, or, for example, to your spouse or your significant other, like, hey, I don't know. I don't know what to do here. I don't have all the answers. And that is super important, to have the humility and honesty and the ability to accept the responsibility that you should have those answers, and it is your job to figure that out. But you're in a place right now where you don't know. And so he's right on track there. But then that third thing of like being actionable, to me, contradicts the humility to be able to say that you don't know. Like, sometimes you're going to be in a place where you don't know and you don't even have actionable intel yet. You don't have a plan. You don't have, this bad day at work, but here's what I did. Or you don't have this confrontation with your spouse, but here's how we're going to move past it. You're just in that spot for a little bit where this sucks and I haven't figured it out yet. And that happens. Um, and so it's not always point A to point B right away. And part of this issue that I have here is taking vulnerability out of the equation because it equates to weakness. And I don't mean to be playing the semantic games just to make a point, but to me, the humility and the honesty comes full circle and is completed with authenticity. And that's what I would say is synonymous with vulnerability. And so I do want to take a second here and just define vulnerability. The dictionary says that it is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. And in one sense, that is a weakness. Like when Ryan is mentioning, if you have a walled city and you have to defend it, if there are vulnerabilities in those walls, they absolutely are weaknesses, and you have to have the humility and honesty to acknowledge and address them and fix them. But that's a one-dimensional view of what vulnerability is. In the Everyman's Odyssey podcast, we spent a lot of time talking about love. And in fact, we did, an entire episode, what is love? And there were some things in there. You should check out that episode as well. You can't love without being vulnerable. It doesn't matter what you love. If you are willing to love someone or something, especially to the point that you're going to express that love, you absolutely are vulnerable. You are taking a risk of being attacked or hurt in some way. And that's kind of mandatory. If you're going to be in a loving relationship, you have to be willing to accept the fact that you love another imperfect person who may and most likely will at some point cause you harm. And if you choose to never be vulnerable, never show emotion, never not have a plan, then your love can only go so deep. Because as long as you are held away in that perfectly walled off city, you're missing out on something. And there's another point, to the fact of vulnerability. I certainly am not the end all be all of relationship advice or success or perfection or anything close to that. But that means that there is something or someone that I want to model my life after, and that especially includes my love and my relationships. And who better to model love after than Jesus? And Jesus was, is wise and humble and honest, but was vulnerable. And we've talked about recently in a podcast episode something that I hadn't really understood the context of until recently. That verse, John 11:35, Jesus wept. Jesus was vulnerable and cried in front of people that he cared about. And if there's anything that Jesus had or showed or expressed in his physical life on earth, I don't want to be afraid to model that behavior. And he was very passionate and brutally honest and authentic and vulnerable. And that is not something that I want to cut myself off from. There's a limit to everything within reason. Like, I don't want to be constantly crying and never have the answers and always be wallowing in doubt and pity. Nobody wants that. Like, that's not even something that your spouse doesn't want for you, your friends don't want for you, God doesn't want for you. Like, you should have joy, wisdom, and strength because those things are readily available to you. However, we are called, I believe, to be vulnerable. Now, that isn't useful in all cases, just like Ryan's saying in the video. You know, when we're defending a castle, we need to identify vulnerabilities and address them and conquer them and move forward. And he makes analogies to defending the castle and commanding troops. And those are true. But in our lives and in our relationships, we are called to be more than commanders. We are called to be lovers as well. And so maybe the commander doesn't show vulnerability, but we are not just one-dimensional beings. In our love lives with our wives, we are certainly not just commanders. Yes, we are leaders, head of household, and those things matter, and you should take a huge amount of responsibility and feel the weight of that and the significance of that and carry that well. But I mean, we are to love our wives the way Christ loved the church and the way that he loved his people. And he cried for and with them and wasn't afraid to show that. And so, again, it's a great video, and I'm not in any way trying to knock it. And I admire the work that Ryan Mickler has done with the Order of Man. And Ryan, if you happen to watch this, I would love to have a conversation with you about that, and we could discuss this idea of vulnerability further. But either way, I thought it was important to address vulnerability is not appropriate in all settings. However, if you're going through life refusing to ever feel or express vulnerability, not only are you missing out on so much, but the people that you love are missing out on a part of you. Because, he's right. Like, my wife doesn't want to see me cry because she doesn't want me to hurt. But she does want to know that I understand when she cries, and she wants to know that I understand the weight or severity of certain, tragedies in our life. And so just like, when Jesus wept when he saw how Lazarus's death was affecting his loved ones, and that moved him to tears, it's okay for us to feel that, and it's okay for us to be at that point occasionally, whenever it is required or beneficial to our loved ones. So like I said, check out the video, and go subscribe to the Order of Man, and leave a comment what you think. Which side do you fall on? Is vulnerability a trap and just an excuse to take pride in your weaknesses and not have to man up? Or is vulnerability a vital part of who we are as men and leaders and followers of God? Let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for tuning into the video. Go check out Everyman's Odyssey podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is you listen to those podcasts. Check us out. Thanks.